Hi, I'm Gary White for Channel 6 Central Kentucky Television, and I'm here for our Political Focus program here on Channel 6, where we give our viewers the opportunity to know the candidates who are running for political office. And I'm here with someone who has been in political office since 2002, correct?
That's correct. I'm in my 16th year, Gary.
16th year. State
Yes.
Senator Jimmy Higdon. You have been a senator since 2009.
Won a special election on December the 8th, 2009, and it was a special election. It was very good, and it's I've been proud to represent the folks in Marion County, Nelson County since 2009, and my district has changed. The only thing that's remained consistent is Marion and Nelson. Of course, I lost Washington County, Taylor County, and Mercer County in redistricting, and picked up Casey, Spencer, and part of Jefferson County. So right now, from one tip of the district, the 14th Senate District, Gary, is about 120 miles. I go as far north as Fern Creek Fire Department, if you know where that is, on Barstown Road. Okay. Fern Creek High School, I go as far north as that. And I go as far south in Casey County as Bethel Ridge, and there's a little place on near Bethel Ridge that's called Fishing Creek, which is a tributary into Lake Cumberland. So I often tell people that I represent from Fern Creek to Fishing Creek, and so it's an interesting district, and it's one that I really enjoy serving. I spend a lot of time on the road, a lot of events. Either direction, at Casey County, Jefferson County, Spencer, Nelson, and here in Marion County. So stay very busy going to events and meeting with folks. Plus my going to Frankfort as a member of leadership. I go to Frankfort quite often.
Absolutely. So Casey County, though, was one of your counties when you were state representative as well, correct?
That's correct, and it was good to get Casey County back. It's spent a lot of time there, and so it was good to get Casey back.
So, as we said, this is our political focus program. We're talking about all the candidates who are running for election, and this is since your first election as senator, this is your first time with opposition as running for senator, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's first time.
And Jimmy will be on the ballot. He's the Republican running for the 14th district, which does cover Marion County and Nelson County in our area. So let's talk about some of the issues that are going on in our community. And I know when we talk throughout the years, we've been talking about the pension issue that's been going on, as well as tax reform.
We have, Gary, and in fact we talked about tax modernization back in 2002 when I ran. That was a topic of discussion. Governor Patton in the year 2000 commissioned I guess they took bids and they went with Dr. Fox, a national known economist from the University of Tennessee, and they commissioned him to do a study of Kentucky's tax structure. And what Dr. Fox, what his report came back, and that report's online, but anyway, when he came back, the recommendations he made, he said Kentucky's tax structure is antiquated and revenues are not growing with the economy. And what he recommended for Kentucky to do was to lower the personal income tax and expand the base, expand consumption taxes. And that was his recommendation in 2002. He also came back, there was a blue ribbon panel. Governor Beshear put together a blue ribbon panel in 2012. Dr. Fox, again, was part of that, made recommendations in 2012. And his recommendation to the blue ribbon panel on taxes, made a recommendation again. Kentucky's tax system is antiquated. It's not growing with the economy, and my recommendation is that Kentucky move to where you expand consumption taxes. That's where the revenue growth needs to be. Reduce personal income tax, expand the base, and that was in 2012. And he made a prediction. He said by the year 2020, if Kentucky doesn't change its tax structure, Kentucky will be $1 billion short and having enough money to pay the bills. And he was correct. Our revenues have not grown with the economy, and one of the main reasons, Gary, one of our main sources of revenue is sales tax, and we're taxing goods, purchases for consumables, and of course most of that revenue came from brick and mortar stores, and now as we start to buy more and more stuff online, a big portion of internet sales are not taxed. Now, if you get something from Amazon has a physical presence in Kentucky, so they collect sales tax for Kentucky. So all Amazon purchases are taxed, but majority of internet sales are not taxed, and that's really eroded our revenue into the as far as our budget goes. So, and that's part of the reason that our revenues have not grown with the economy. The economy grows 2-3% a year, and our revenues have not grown. Our income from the sales tax has not grown and kept pace with that.
So there was, last session, there were new laws that were passed in order to potentially deal with that?
It's kind of a change in strategy. Like I said, we're going from a tax primarily on income to a consumption tax, and it's a sea change, and it's a transition, and it's not. There will be other things that we need to do, and there's some unintended consequences with this bill. So, but again, it shifts what we did this time. There was a 1% reduction in personal income tax, so everybody got in their paycheck, instead of a 6% deduction, there was a 5% deduction, and on state income tax. So everyone ended up with a little more money in their paycheck. Actually, it was a 17% reduction in income tax, from 6% to 5%. And we expanded the base. We included many services in what we collect tax on. So again, it's a shift. Yes, it will generate more money as we go forward because it will grow with the economy. There's a lot of services that are available today, and folks spend, that's where they spend a lot of their money. So it's a plan as we go forward that will grow with the economy. But again, every time we do that, there needs to be a reduction in the personal income tax. We look at the states that are very successful and their economies are really booming. Kentucky's economy is doing decent, but Tennessee has just, over the last 20 years has just grown by leaps and bounds compared to what Kentucky has, and their population has grown. And they have a 0 personal income tax. And some are concerned about poverty levels, but Tennessee has much lower poverty levels than Kentucky, and they're at 0%. Texas also has 0 personal income tax, and so does Florida. We can't get to 0. To get to 0, we would have to tax groceries, food, and medicine, and that's just not going to happen in Kentucky. We're not going to tax food and medicine. So. But Indiana, a neighbor to our north, whose economy is doing very well, their personal income tax is at 3.5%. We can get to that. We can get to 3.5%, and we can reduce that personal income tax to 3.5%. And that would be that's a goal. It's a long range goal. But Gary, it was a sea change, and even though all these recommendations, everybody's known for years that the tax structure had to be changed. This year it was a difficult vote for me, but it was a vote that had to happen so we can, again, that our revenues grow with the economy. And we don't want government to grow and spend too much money, but we have necessary expenses that we have to pay, and pensions being one of them. Pensions and public protection are our Medicaid, those things, we have to pay, and they're becoming a bigger and bigger part of our budget. and it really stretches. And you know, another part, the biggest part of our budget for years has been education. So as these other parts of our budget grow that we can't really control, it puts a real strain on our education dollars, and we've got to make sure that we properly fund education, because we do have, you know, good schools in our area. We have very good teachers, and you know, we need to support them. And again, it's important that our revenues grow with the economy.
So there are two questions that have been raised with the tax reform. Well, if we start there, one is that with some of the services, they're kind of questioning which services have been taxed, and do taxing services adversely affect the poorer residents of Kentucky as opposed to the wealthier ones? And then also, there were some unintended consequences that came with some of the things that were taxed. What are your response to that?
Well, you know, the unintended consequences, you know, taxing nonprofits, that was due to a court case. And we will correct that. That's an unintended consequence. And there's some other things we need to correct. But as far as income tax, Gary, any individual that makes less than 150% of the poverty level, national poverty level, that's $15,000 in Kentucky, they pay zero income tax. Mm-hmm. A family of four that makes $25,000 or less a year, they will pay no personal income tax. And again, we have some work to do on the lower income portions of our tax reform, and we'll look at that. But it's a fair system. Again, in Tennessee, it's working very well. And again, their poverty level is much lower than Kentucky's. You know, and that is always a concern about, you know, how we tax, but again, I think it's one that's a fair system, a very fair system.
Now, the other big issue that's with the pensions, when they were dealt with, there was a lot of talk of how it would affect new teachers and current teachers and those areas, and there was a lot of discussion on that. What's your take on that whole issue?
Well, let's, you know, that we have a big problem in Kentucky with pensions, and we've talked about it. We've talked about it. This is the first time it's really been addressed, and it's a painful transition, and you know, the governor's rhetoric didn't help any, and most teachers will tell me that they're still very upset with the governor, and I understand that. You know, that's he shouldn't have said the things that he said, and but you know, that's with that said, in our budget, let me talk about our budget, the amount of money, because the only way out of this problem that we find ourselves in. Pensions have been underfunded for years, and we've talked about it. And this is the first time this budget here that we just passed in 2018 was the first time ever, or at least the first time since the year 2000, that that pensions have been fully funded. In 2014, Gary, we put in an additional $1 billion into pensions. This is above and beyond our match, what we're required to do. We put in an additional $1 billion, 5% of our budget. In 2016, we put in additional $2.3 billion into our budget, and that, you know, to pay the unfunded liability. That was 10% of our budget. This budget we just passed, Gary, we allocated $3.4 billion in this budget to pay the unfunded liability. And Senate Bill 151 that's being challenged in court, it committed or obligated, statutorily required the General Assembly in the 2020 budget to put in $4.2 billion into pensions, and we'll do that for the next 30 years. $4.2 billion, 20% of our budget. That's how serious this problem is. That's a huge commitment, but it's the only way that our pensions will remain solvent. It's the only way to pay them off is to pay them off over time. But if we want those pensions to remain solvent, we want state employees and teachers that when I look them in the eye, I want to make sure that I can tell them that, we have funded their pensions, and the chances of them getting their check 20 years from now is greatly improved. And so that's the issue. But again, 20% of our budget in the next budget, 20% of that, Gary, there's $500 million in each year toward teachers' retirement to pay their ARC. And there's also $400 million in each year to teachers' retirement to go from percentage of payroll to level dollar payments. And that's a long explanation. We won't get into that, but people all across the country have used this percentage of payroll over the years. And pension systems across the country are I think, $5 trillion underfunded. And a big portion of it was because of this assumption that they use is called percentage of payroll. And what that has done over the years is kept our pension payments artificially low. And for the last, 10 years or so, we haven't even been paying the interest on the retirement. And so this extra $800 million in next year's budget does that. So in the next budget, we put in $1.8 billion into teachers' retirement, $4.2 billion total into all the retirement systems to make sure that over the next 30 years that they're fully funded. Huge commitment, Gary. So, asked me about pensions, and that's, that's the biggest thing we've done. We funded them. And let's talk about changes to the pension system. In the past, in Senate Bill 151, that's again currently being challenged in court. My crystal ball is a little murky and it's not working. I can't tell you how the Kentucky Supreme Court will rule on Senate Bill 151, but if it passes, or if they find that to be constitutional, there is no change to retired teachers. Nothing changes with them, and that's something that I fought very hard to make sure that their COLAs were not reduced, because teachers do not receive Social Security, Gary. That COLA, cost of living allowance that they receive every year, they don't receive Social Security, and Social Security does a cost of living adjustment or allowance every year, and so that's the only way that teachers' retirement will increase is with that COLA. So that's very important to them, and that's, to me, in my opinion, that's part of the viable contract that we have with teachers, is that COLA for their retirement. So no change to retired teachers. For current teachers, the only change was the capping of the sick days, and that was somewhat of a compromise in the bill that, and we'll talk about in a minute, that all the K groups, KEA and JCTA and the Kentucky Association of Superintendents and they all, and Kentucky Retired Teachers, they all supported this bill called the Shared Responsibility Bill, House Bill 539. They all supported that, and in that bill, they agree to cap the sick days. And most that I talked to, that's been an appropriate move. But what that does, it every sick day that a teacher has accumulated to date, they can keep, and they can use that toward retirement. Moving forward, they can still get paid for those sick days, but they can't use it toward their retirement. That's the only change to current teachers. The only change to current teachers. Now, for new hires, we did go to a hybrid cash balance. The reason we went to hybrid cash balance, and all across the country, we see people moving away from a defined benefit pension. Mainly, Gary, because you can't control the cost. There's so many moving parts. So people are moving away from a defined benefit and moving more to a 401k. So what the hybrid cash balance is, it's a 401 type account, and the difference between it and a 401k, the big difference, is that the state of Kentucky guarantees that they will never lose any money. Okay, and that's the biggest risk with a 401k is the fact that you could lose money. So we guarantee teachers in this new plan that they will not lose any money. We guarantee that every year. We guarantee it, And so that's a good thing. And then also a difference between a 401k and the hybrid cash balance. At the end of their term, they have an option to do a lot of things. They can buy a lifetime annuity that will guarantee them a certain amount of money every month. And also this money, a current current teacher now that's working, if they when they die, or if they die, a month into retirement, or 50 years into retirement, whatever's left over, the family can't inherit it. But with a hybrid cash balance, the family can inherit the balance of that fund. Now, we got a letter from the JCTA sent out to their members, and the Kentucky Retired Teachers and the JCTA hired an actuary to look at this hybrid cash balance. And their report back is that, the hybrid cash balance will produce as good a revenue, or be as a good a plan, is comparable to their current plan. That's what they came back and said. And so that's where we're at on, and that's what we passed. But let me tell you just a little bit, Gary, about the plan that the shared responsibility that the K groups recommended. Again, anybody that's watching can go look at that. It's House Bill 539. And in the first 2 pages is it's a 400-page bill. They don't have to read the first 2 pages to understand what I'm saying. But that plan, again, recommended by the K groups. When I was out, I've been out campaigning, and after the House Bill 151 passed, I've talked to a lot of teachers, and before it passed, I had a lot of emails and phone calls and notes. And there's 5 basic things that teachers tell me that they didn't want. And I listened to them, but this is what they told me they didn't want. Don't reduce my benefits. Don't make me pay more. Don't make me work longer. Don't reduce or suspend my COLA, and don't require the school systems to pay any additional money. House Bill 539, in the first 2 pages, it says if the retirement fund ever drops below 95% funded, and the chances of it dropping below 95% funded are very high. If it ever drops below 95% funded, the board can reduce their benefits, make them pay more, make them work longer, suspend or reduce their COLAs, and require the school system to pay up to 2% toward the retirement. And the state, in that plan, the state is locked in at 8%. The most the state could ever put into that plan is 8%. So remember I told you with the hybrid cash balance, the state accepts the liability of guaranteeing that pension never drop, that they never lose any money in that 401k. The state guarantees that. So the state assumes a lot of liability. In House Bill 539, the state the state's liability is capped at 8%. So in that plan, the teachers assume the liability, and that's just simply not a good plan, Gary. And that was the plan that was brought to us for the by the K groups. And if you put them side by side, I think most people would say that the hybrid cash balance plan doesn't look that bad. And of course, it's going to be 27 years, 25 years before anybody draws off that plan. So if down the road we discover that there's issues with that plan, it can be addressed. So, but that's where we're at. We'll see what the courts rule on Senate Bill 151. If they declare that it's unconstitutional, we'll be back to the drawing board. Be a lot of discussions, and I will continue to work and try to find a fair system, and that's what I did this time. I was kind of the person that I was very involved with the pensions, Gary, and I tried to make sure that the reform was fair, and it was that it was something that was workable, and that it was properly funded.